This week on Wealth Track, China expert Jim McGregor gives us his candid assessment of the competitive threat that China's leadership poses to the U.S. Next on Consuelo Mack, Wealth Track. Hello and welcome to this Wealth Track podcast. I'm Consuelo Mack. Our focus is China. The backdrop, contentious trade talks with the U.S., which have roiled markets, massive pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, and an overtly aggressive Chinese president, Xi Jinping, who since he took office in 2013 has taken on more power than any Chinese leader since Mao Zedong, and has announced plans to dominate key global industries with his Made in China 2025 initiative and dominate land and sea routes from Asia to Europe with his China Belt and Road Initiative, the most ambitious infrastructure investment effort in history based on the ancient Silk Road. Our guest is the refreshingly candid China expert James McGregor, whom I have known for years since we met at the Wall Street Journal, where he was bureau chief in mainland China, then CEO of Dow Jones Company in China, and was former chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce there. He is currently chairman of APCO Worldwide, Greater China, where he specializes in advising multinationals on business, public policy, and communication strategies. He is also the author of several books, including No Ancient Wisdom, No Followers: The Challenges of Chinese Authoritarian Capitalism. And we will have links to Jim on our website, wealthtrack.com. Jim McGregor, it's great to have you on this Wealth Track podcast. There is a lot to talk about. There's been so much going on in China. And I really want to discuss your role as chairman of APCO Worldwide, Greater China, and specifically what you are advising businesses on the current state of China's leadership under President Xi, who has been dubbed the chairman of everything, COE. So tell me what you're telling businesses.
I advise businesses basically fasten your seatbelts, because this is not a passing squabble. This isn't just another downturn in U.S.-China relations. This is a paradigm shift, and we don't know what it's going to look like when we come out the other end. China's on the move in very strong and very exclusive ways, doing things its own way around the world and following rules where they work for China. If they don't work for China, they pretend they don't exist. And meanwhile, we've got, the U.S. is going through all of our own trials and tribulations on where we're headed in the world. It's a new day and age. What you know from the past, the last 30 years in China are not the next 30 years in China, and the U.S.-China relations we've had in the past are not the relations of the future. And this is sorting itself out. It's going to have to sort itself out, whether it's the ongoing trade war, whether it's how do we decouple on technology, how do we handle China with its Belt and Road Initiative, and it just goes on and on and on into everything from military to technology to soybeans.
How has it changed the business climate in China for foreign businesses specifically, and U.S. multinationals? Who are your clients?
Well, the business reasons we're in this situation is the business climate has changed for foreign multinationals and foreign companies in China over a period of the last 5 to 10 years. Under Xi Jinping, we've been more and more kind of looking at what I call reform and closing as opposed to Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening. China's doing a number of reforms for its own companies and its own systems, but it's step by step in making it more difficult for foreign companies. And when a Chinese company can do what a foreign company does, they can suddenly find they've got little room to do business in China. And then when we get to a lot of this is really, we have a technology war going on more than a trade war. And, with China and its various technology policies that have been capped off by Made in China 2025, which is basically about dominating all the important technologies of the future, from chips to artificial intelligence to new materials to cloud computing, and you name it. And the thing about this policy is it's not so aspirational. It's got quotas. You know, they say by this year the Chinese market will have 80% in this sector will be Chinese companies, and it's very clear that the goal is to step by step have Chinese companies replace foreign companies in the China market and then beat them globally. And we learned long ago when China says they're going to do something, you better pay attention.
Are those realistic goals? It sounds as if you are saying that in fact they are, that where there's a Chinese will, there's a way. Is it possible that will dominate AI, for instance, artificial intelligence? Or, tell me where you think that they are developing clear competitive advantages, and maybe where they are not, because I just have a hard time believing just because they say that they're going to dominate these key industries that in fact they have the technology and the wherewithal to do so.
Yeah, let me take that in a little different direction. If you look at China's development in the past and the way we in the West looked at China, we had a bit of arrogance that you could not become a prosperous country unless you had democracy and open information. And China has kindly turned that on its head, and actually now the Chinese system has some advantages because of the amount of money that can be put into these technologies by companies and entities that don't have to make money. If you're Huawei and you got a $30 billion line of credit from China Development Bank and standards made for you and this and that, you can really power ahead on 5G with billions of dollars, where Verizon and the rest of the phone carriers out there have to make money, and then on the side they do their R&D. But what we're really talking about here, Consuelo, is talent. Can China innovate? You're damn right they can. Why? Because, we trained them. If you look at the tens of thousands of incredibly smart and capable Chinese who've gone to MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Cal Polytech, they work for Siemens, they work for Google, they work for HP, you name it. Those people are now in China, and Xi Jinping is really consolidating a lot under the state-owned enterprise for the party's own power. At the same time, they are pushing ahead with entrepreneurship and innovation. There's endless amounts of Chinese venture capital money available to these people. And they are there, and they've got all the advantages in the world, and they've got the talent, and they've got the ability to do it. I mean, if you look at the leading Chinese artificial intelligence companies or chip companies or whatever, these people came out of Microsoft, they came out of Intel, they came out of Qualcomm, they came out of NVIDIA. We have to really wake up. I see too much in the U.S. where people say, they can't innovate. It's state enterprise. China's got multi-layers, and what we have to remember is the talent. And as long as China enables talent, which they are doing on the technology side very, very much so, we have to wake up and compete, to be honest with you. With what's going on with this trade war, America should be taking this as a Sputnik moment, to fix our own immigration, to anybody gets a PhD in the sciences, give them a green card, fund our own science and technology education. On the other hand, China's the one that's treating this as a Sputnik moment, saying we can't be dependent on American technology and American suppliers, so we're going to replace them.
It's so interesting, Jim, because it sounds as if you're talking about a Sputnik moment, because when you were just talking, I thought of the entire JFK putting down the gauntlet and saying that we're going to go to the moon by the end of the decade, and spending the resources and devoting the talent and everything else, and we actually succeeded in doing that. However, resources are exhaustible, and so when you're talking about unlimited money, they don't have to compete in the marketplace. They don't have to make money in order to get the funding, whatever it is. I mean, is there a limit to what they can do, or we just haven't seen that yet?
Yeah, well, of course, does China have endless money? We ask ourselves this question all the time because of all the money it's putting into the Belt and Road and everything else. But remember, a lot of this money, there's a lot of rich Chinese people with hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, and they're also investing. This isn't just the government. You talk about what you said about Kennedy struck me because Ren Zhengfei, the founder of Huawei, just a few days ago, he sent out a directive to his 170,000 or whatever employees that they are now in a live or die moment. And that, and the way he put it, in 3 to 5 years, Huawei will be flowing with new blood. And if they survive this critical moment in history, they will be able to dominate the world, which is his goal. Think about that. That's the spirit they have going. Look, I'm not here boosting the Chinese, as you know. I've been there 30 years, and I'm a fact-based person, and I'm also quite critical of things. But these days, I want to wake up America. I want to wake up America that we have to wake up and we have to compete. It's not so much trying to say, well, China won't be able to do this, and they can't do this, they can't do that. China's the one with the can-do spirit now. We're the one with the can't-do spirit. I'm in Washington twice a year with business people from American Business, American Chamber, and visiting with congressmen and senators and members of the administration, and we go to them with ideas and say, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And they say, that's a great idea, but we just can't do that. We can't do things around here. Well, I can tell you, China's not a can't-do place, but America's got to get back to that. We got to compete.
As far as that, we have to compete because, traditionally we've competed through the private sector and much less through government funding. But is it possible in a capitalist system and in a free market system where we do have to pay attention to, the bottom line and the balance sheet? Can this kind of competition and competitive effort come from the private sector, or are you saying we need a new public-private partnership approach, as you said, a la the Sputnik moment?
Well, actually, Consuelo, if you look at our history, if you look at the history of innovation in America, it goes back to government, it goes back to academia, and it goes back to companies all working together. And where we have really, where we have overcome barriers and where we've gone through our own Sputnik moments, that's been government money working with the private sector. We've just quit doing that. We've kind of bled ourselves dry now. You need the government involved in this. Look, we go way back to, China. America was the world's largest, state-driven economy during World War II when we were run by the War Production Board, and it was a guy from Sears. Now, I'm not saying we go back to that, but let's not delude ourselves on where we came from. A lot of the reason America got where it is, it was government working with business, not just business on its own. Business is too short-term centered. Let's just worry about the next quarter. And as you saw, the conference board the other day was talking about, we've got to go beyond just shareholder value. We've got to look out for employees. We've got to look out for our businesses, and we should probably look out for the country. This is where globalization has really caused a problem with American business, because if your only incentive is for shareholders, and you're a big American company, well, the majority of your business these days, the vast majority for the technology companies, is outside of the U.S. So how do you get them to care about the U.S. and make decisions that are good for the U.S. economy? That's going to take government.
Politics is really important in the U.S., but it's especially important in China. And I'm looking, as I mentioned, earlier on in our discussion, they call President Xi Jinping, the chairman of everything, and he certainly has consolidated power. There's been a huge, shift in party leadership. I mean, he's locked people up. There's much more, as I said, intervention, overt intervention. There's much more suppression of dissent than there has been. I mean, none of those are conducive really to, as far as I can tell, or maybe this is just a false Western view to innovation and creativity. If you're afraid that if you get too successful that you're going to be locked up, or if you speak your mind that your businesses are going to be shut down. I mean, isn't it possible that the seeds of the destruction are in this consolidation of power and the crackdown on dissent and crackdown on minorities and travel and you tell me, isn't that a problem or couldn't it be a problem?
Yes, it can. Xi Jinping, when he came into office, he came into a mess. Corruption was off the charts. They had to change the economic model from low-cost manufacturing and kind of borrowing and stealing the technology of others. They had, it's got to be their own consumer market that builds the economy. They've got to do their own technology and all of that. And he had a mess on his hands politically. But what has he done since then? I look at his administration as really a story of overreach, going too far in every direction. Made in China 2025 is an overreach. The Chinese people are completely capable, as I was saying earlier, of building a world-beating tech sector. They've gone to our schools, they've worked in our companies, there's abundant venture capital. If this was private Chinese people going out and buying companies and doing joint ventures and whatever, the world would not have a big problem with it. It would work fine. But because it was a state and it was about crushing and dominating, and it woke up the world's technology companies, and so there's a lot of pushback. China is going to have a hell of a time doing any acquisitions of any technology overseas for many years. The Belt and Road Initiative has been a big overreach and led to a lot of problems in poor countries where they're heavily indebted to China. The South China Sea and those islands is an overreach because after spending 20 years of trying to make friends with its neighbors, or at least pretending to make friends with its neighbors, it just said, hey, this is our ocean, and you guys better behave and get along with us. So you're right. And what does this add up to? I mean, look at the situation in Hong Kong right now. The people in Hong Kong have grown up with liberty without democracy, but they have had liberty. They had unbiased courts. They had the legal system that protected them, and they don't want to lose that. This is a middle class rising up. These aren't a bunch of radicals. In Hong Kong, you grow up without walls. In China, you grew up with walls. You can only go so far in either direction, but those walls are wider than ever, so people feel pretty good about it in most cases. But they don't understand what's going on. Who are these Hong Kong people and why are they doing that? It's a real dilemma. It's a real dilemma on how do you bring this to a close, especially when you've got the things going on with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. So, Consuelo, you're right. It's not all smooth sailing. There's a lot of problems mounting for this leadership. And we're not sure how it's going to sort itself out. I want to turn to the United States and say, even if China runs into big problems, unless we have our stuff together, it's not automatic that we're going to win anything.
The significance of the Hong Kong anti-government demonstrations, how significant are they, and how much of a threat to Chinese leadership? And is it possible for there to be an outcome that does favor greater liberalization in Hong Kong?
Well, if you look at how they've handled it, where the propaganda apparatus is at full steam, and what is happening in Hong Kong, according to the propaganda, is that this is the machinations of the West, especially America. That is who's doing this, and it's about keeping China down. So to flip from that to some kind of a concession on liberalization, and Xi isn't a person that concedes on liberalization. He's hardline from morning till evening and throughout the night, and I don't know if he's capable of doing any kind of a concession. And the thing is, they don't want this to infect the rest of China. If people in Hong Kong demonstrate and they get concessions out of it, what does that mean for the rest of China? That's why this is so complicated and unpredictable where it would end. Because if he goes in there and there's a Tiananmen style crackdown and people are killed or hurt and they round them up, that's also going to alienate the world. I mean, what are American multinationals going to do if they go in and start shooting in Hong Kong? Are they going to just do business as usual in China? How this plays out on top of all the other things going on is just I don't know, but it's a fraught with danger.
Jim, speaking of difficult problems let's talk about the trade relations with the U.S. And there was a Wall Street Journal op-ed by an Obama administration official, and the headline was, "We have lost the trade war with China." What's your assessment of the trade relationship between China and the U.S.?
Well, to a large extent, I may agree with that. We needed a pushback, and it was coming. Hillary would have pushed back, Trump, pushed back, but the way we've done it is not very effective. In fact, I think it's some days I think we're making China great again. If you look at the sequence of events and how we've done this with the tariffs and then tying it to North Korea and dropping out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Let me go to that for a second. Dropping out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was Obama's signature trade policy, that created a trading regime of 40% of GDP. It opened up those countries to us. We're already open to those countries in Asia, and it gave those countries a hedge against China. And China was not part of it. And I know the reformers in Beijing wanted us to do TPP because it would incentivize China to change to, in a positive way, to be in a trade regime, not hitting them over the head and telling them what to do. And we've gone through so many zigs and so many zags in this trade in our trade negotiations with China. They've just decided they can't deal with us, and they're going to wait us out, and they can wait a lot longer than we can because, you listen to Kudlow and some of the stuff that comes out of this administration. They seem to believe that China is going to bend at the knee at the majesty of the United States. They do not understand the power of China and the companies there and the technology and the people and the money, and also it's quite coordinated. They can wait this out a lot longer than we can. I work with the Semiconductor Industry Association, the Advanced Medical Device, and these, if you're in those businesses and you don't have the China market, you're not going to make it globally. Our American chip companies, anywhere from 20% to 75% of their chips go to China. They can't lose that market. So it's very, very complicated, and you probably ascertained I'm not a big fan of President Trump. He's kind of like the drunken sailor of trade negotiators. He heads down one way one day and another way the next day, and China just thinks, well, this guy, we can't deal with him. And poor old Lighthizer is trying to have a professional negotiation, but he ends up having to clean up the mess of the last tweet. We needed a pushback, but boy, we're not doing it in an effective way in any way, shape, or form.
Final topic of conversation, because WealthTrack is about long-term diversified investing, and certainly in any well-diversified portfolio, China should play a part. What does the current state of China's leadership, which is going to be around, barring some unforeseen circumstance, for a long, long time, what about the investment opportunities for foreigners in China?
It's not a bad time for venture capital, actually, except that trade war is getting in the way of cross-border venture capital. I'm not qualified to tell people how to invest, but I would have them look at their portfolios and look deeply into the companies that they're invested in and what they're doing and how they're handling China. Because I can tell you, Consuelo, one thing that is going on that is not very well covered is, the supply chains. We're seeing some supply chains leaving China for Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Mexico, and in many cases that was just waiting to happen because costs have gotten so high in China. These people were eating margin to stay in China because China was so efficient and it worked so well. But with the trade war happening, it kind of the straw that broke the camel's back on moving that manufacturing out. On the other hand, there's lots of companies doubling down on China. Lots of Fortune 1000 companies are doubling down on China because if you are in coatings, chemicals, components, anything to do with high-end manufacturing, Internet of Things, self-driving cars, electric vehicles, they know China's going to be the leader in those sectors. And if you're not in China, you're not going to make it. And so there's a lot going on. Major companies putting more and more of their investment in China. And with what's going on with Huawei and blocking technology companies from supplying Huawei and more Chinese companies, I'm afraid we're going to see some of these big American technology companies de-Americanize. When we used to have companies that because of American taxes were so high, they'd go buy a company in Ireland and then become an Irish company to avoid taxes. We may start seeing some of the American technology companies get themselves a legal foothold somewhere else so they can claim they're not American, so that they don't get blocked from selling into China, because China's still the market. And it's going to be the market for the next several decades, and they're hell-bent on technology development and high-end manufacturing, and you can't not be a part of that. This administration has a very simplistic view and also an overblown view of our power versus China. We need to be much more informed and much more realistic on where we are. And look, I'm a patriotic American. I was in the Army. I was in Vietnam. I care a lot about America, and that's why I talk like this. I can see we better focus on ourselves and compete.
Jim McGregor, always a pleasure to talk to you. We welcome your perspective. It's unlike anyone else that basically just about exists in the globe. You've had a footprint in journalism and in running a business over there and now advising businesses. You've really got just an amazingly broad and in-depth perspective on China. So we really appreciate your sharing it with us on WealthTrack.
I'm always happy to talk to you, Consuelo.
I want to thank you, our viewers, as well for joining us on this Consuelo Mack WealthTrack podcast. Make the week ahead a profitable and a productive one.